right, we're going to go ahead and get this Health and Human Services committee session. We're going to hear regarding two very important matters this morning. We're going to start with a briefing and discussion on efforts to increase early screening for developmental delays and disabilities. I'd like to invite Mr. Avner Shapiro, Mr. Larry Bram, Ms. Pat Ritter, Mr. Laurent Leroy, Ms. Barbara Andrews, and Ms. Jane Salzano to the dais, please. So I am familiar with this issue, but one of the most interesting briefings that I received early on into the first year of my first term was a group of committed individuals, some of which are seated at the dais right now, who helped very clearly and plainly articulate just how critically important it is that we, as early as possible, assess the needs of our children, and that this has massive ramifications in later adult life if a diagnosis is not done early enough. And I also learned that there is still a great deal of education that needs to happen among our healthcare sector and healthcare industry, let alone parents. And so I thought it was an opportune time for the entire county, to hear what is going on, what is happening, and I so appreciate you all coming here today. So with that, I want to turn it over to Ms. McMillan for any opening comments, and then if not, we can go into the presentation. Ms. McMillan.
Just to say that you've highlighted the issue very well. In front of you, you do have a revised budget, which they'll share with you, and behind that are letters of support from some organizations and individuals, and that's in front of you as well. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. And with that, I'd turn it over.
Okay. Well, good morning. Thank you for having us here. I'm Larry Bram. I wear a lot of hats. I'm a senior vice president at Easter Seals. I'm a member of the Commission on People with Disabilities. I'm on the Maryland Commission on Caregiving, and I'm also a parent of a young adult with disabilities. Today, we're going to have a bunch of people talk to you a little bit, and then hopefully talk with you for the rest of the time, including Pat Ritter, who's the CEO of the Treatment and Learning Centers, Avner Shapiro, who's a parent and also a member of the Commission on People with Disabilities, and really the driving force behind what we've been doing. Laurent Leroy from the Early Childhood Coordinating Council, and Jane Salzano, who's the founder of CSAC and also a parent. And then there's a lot of people in the room from MCPS and infants and toddlers who can join the conversation later as well. So today we're going to share some statistics, I'll tell some personal stories, and make a proposal to the county with a truly audacious goal. And then we're going to outline how we got from where we started to being here today. So let me start just to remind everybody of some sobering statistics. 1 in 50 children will be diagnosed with autism. A new study just came out that said about 25% of children with autism are undiagnosed by age 8, and this undiagnosis disproportionately affects children of color. And so there's your racial equity piece right up front. We knew it, now there's a study showing it. Approximately 8,000 children in the county each year enter school with undiagnosed delays. And statewide, only about 40% of children are screened for developmental disabilities at the time suggested by the AAP. It's better than some states. Virginia's at 25%, but it's nowhere near good enough. So let me turn it over now to Avner, who's going to talk about what we propose.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Avner Shapiro.
Avner, you have to press your button.
My name is
Yeah.
There you go. Thank you. I have a bit of a cold, so I apologize if I start coughing in the middle of this in advance. Again, my name is Avner Shapiro, and I serve as a commissioner on the county's Commission on People with Disabilities. Let me begin, if I may, by telling you a little about some experiences I had with my oldest son, Ezra, when he was a toddler. As Ezra approached his second year of life, my wife and I started to wonder whether Ezra was developing normally. Of course, it was very hard for us to know because at the time neither one of us had had too much experience with what is normal for a 2-year-old. So what did we do? We relied heavily on the counseling we received at each of our wellness visits from our experienced and well-credentialed pediatrician. And our pediatrician told us that he had seen thousands of children over the course of his career, and that Ezra was well within the band of normal. Now, when he told us this, he was not relying on screening tests he had taken, tests that would have quickly alerted him to the fact that what was going on with Ezra was definitely not normal. No, he was relying, like so many other pediatricians do, entirely on his clinical skills. By the time Ezra was about 2.5 years old, my wife and I decided that we didn't care what our pediatrician was telling us. We believed something was wrong, so we looked for a developmental pediatrician or psychologist to test him. We couldn't find anyone to see him right away. So we went to the provider with the shortest waiting list, Georgetown University Hospital. The developmental pediatrician that we met with there a few months later said things to us that hit like a hammer blow to the heart. She told us that Ezra had autism. She told us that there was a good chance that Ezra would never talk. She told us that we really should have had Ezra evaluated earlier. She gave us a 1-page document that had some generic advice on how to play games like peekaboo with a child with a developmental disability. And then she showed us the door. And my wife and I were left to navigate on our own all of the information and disinformation on the web about what to do to help a child with autism. Fast forward to today, Ezra is now a wonderful young man who most definitely can talk. But there's a lot he struggles with, and he will never be fully independent. And the sad truth is that an ever-growing body of scientific literature and data establishes that the trajectory of his life could have been much better if he had received evidence-based early intervention. The experience my wife and I had with Ezra when he was a toddler remains all too common. Despite the compelling need for evidence-based 0 to 3 early intervention, best estimates indicate that Montgomery County's Early Intervention Service, MCITP, currently provides services to less than half of those who would qualify. Moreover, many of those who do receive early intervention receive treatment that has not been properly tailored to address the child's needs because of an initial failure to properly identify the characteristics of the disability. These problems stem from delays in identification and delays in referrals. For instance, a recent study found that in Maryland, most 8-year-olds with autism were neither identified as having autism or linked with appropriate services prior to age 4. We're now calling on the county to go forward with a cost-effective initiative to address these delays. The initiative has been developed over the last couple of years by a diverse coalition of stakeholders, including area pediatricians, leaders of county nonprofits providing early intervention services, leaders of county leaders of county commissions charged with advocating on behalf of persons with disabilities and young children, and parent advocates. As my colleagues will explain, we also had the opportunity to pilot an important element of the initiative last year. Moreover, throughout the initiative has been developed in consultation with leaders responsible for early childhood education. Some of them are sitting behind me from our HHS. So what we're proposing can be distilled into just 3 elements. First, we propose that HHS, working with stakeholders, engaged in sustained, consistent outreach and coordination with pediatric practices within the county, both to increase compliance with universal screening protocols and to improve care coordination between pediatrician and service providers such as MCITP. Second, we propose that the county select and promote adoption of an electronic system of care that includes screening, referral, and data management tools for use by both area pediatricians and MCITP. This type of software is already being used by over 60 of the area's roughly 250 pediatricians. Our proposal would aim to get that closer to all 250. in 5 years, and for the first time, link the software used by pediatricians with the software used by MCITP. And the third element of the initiative is for MCITP to make certain additional investments to keep up with the growth in need that will inevitably result from improved screening and referral practices. One final point. In our view, if we go forward with this initiative, the county can set for itself 2 ambitious goals. First, the county should aim to screen 100% of our infants and toddlers. Second, the county should strive to achieve the goal of linking 100% of its toddlers with the developmental disabilities, including with autism, with evidence-based interventions by no later than 24 months. While these goals are ambitious, we believe that this is a critical first step to getting it done. Thank you so much for your attention to this important issue.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm now going to tell you a little bit about the project that we've been doing for the last year. But first, I'm going to tell a slightly different story. Now you're going to hear the story of my daughter, who was 26 years old last week. She was born with 2 very rare brain malformations, agenesis of the corpus callosum and polymicrogyria. There are some hundreds of people in the United States with that combination. It shows itself as cerebral palsy. Now, we learned something was wrong at 1 day old, so a neurologist at 24 hours old, and Sarah had her first MRI at 5 days old. So we got, we were told when my daughter was 5 days old, she's missing part of her brain and will probably never speak. Now, my life was blown up then, but thank God, because unlike Avner's story, my daughter was in intensive early intervention by 3 months old. And granted, there's some privilege, and my wife quit her job and worked with her full time, and we had private therapy on top of the county, so, we recognize that. But today, 26 years later, my daughter has a college degree. She's living in her own apartment with aid and assistance, and she works as a speech-language pathology assistant. She just got her license to do that. So clearly she can talk. Or as I said at her bat mitzvah, sometimes you better be careful what you pray for. So, to me, I am a total believer in early intervention. Is there a straight cause and effect? No, it's complicated. But clearly, the fact that we didn't wait 2 years to get into services, that our whole life was realigned at that moment. And it supports a new article that just came out in Pediatrics, and I've got a quote up on the screen. Interventions work best when they are early, when they are intense, and when they involve the family. And that we were able to do all of those. So what have we been doing for the last 2 years? Avner approached me at one commission meeting and said, what do you think about this? And I said, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's get together and talk. And then Avner started inviting all these people in. And for about 2 years, we sort of had a study group. We researched best practices. We identified and looked at software and had vendors talk to us. We gathered research. And then we won a grant from the Washington Area's Women Foundation for a project that ran in 2019. That project has had, with very little, we got half of what we asked for, so our proposal had a staff person in it. There was no staff person, so Pat really became the staff person. We divvied up the work, Pat did most of it. But the results, 1 year of 0 FTEs, or her second job on top of her other 3 jobs, we got 18 new pediatricians enrolled in the project. So now there's about 67-ish in the county using the software we pick called Chattis. 3,200 children have been screened, and that's going to shoot up a lot because we got people on right towards the end of the year, so a lot more will go. And we got a lot of people screened, and I don't need to do this. One of the nice effects of the project is that we were working with infants and toddlers of how do we, one of the biggest issues is getting children from that screening positive into services and into diagnosis and the referral. So now CHAT has created something that's available worldwide but created for us, where with the parents' permission, they sign the right forms, and the doctor can hit a button in Chattis, and a fax goes to infant and toddler with the referral. So it takes out that parents who just heard potentially, life-changing news, they don't have to do the follow-up. And then infants and toddlers will try to reach them. So now let's let Pat talk about how she spent her last year.
So Pat Ritter, Executive Director of the Treatment and Learning Centers, and really here from a provider point of view, TLC serves young children through adults with developmental disabilities. And what our experience is, the earlier intervention, the better quality of life outcomes. And that is supported by research. And the money put in from the county now will be less money in the future, and I think that's the important thing, that there'll be less special education, maybe less health care costs. People will be more independent, including the community, so they'll have jobs. So now we have less housing, less community support services. So there is truly a early intervention to less costs in the future, and also just better quality of life. So as Avner said, I didn't know what I was getting into when I took on this task. I sort of knew. But I was to reach out to the physicians to try to bring them in. And I thought, this is going to be easy. We're offering them something free for a year, no problem. Well, the challenges, I realized, were more than I thought. So the reason I'm bringing this up is it's important to have a dedicated project manager, because it's a lot of time and work, and it's really building relationships. So I had relationships because we have a medical advisory board, I have referrals, but even with those relationships, just getting to the pediatrician is amazingly hard, just trying to have conversations. Secondly, reluctance to change. All of us are reluctant to change, but it has to do with how's it going to fit into our operations? What's this going to look like? Cost was a big factor, time was a big factor. So as I went along then, I started to have Q&As so that I was almost answering all those questions that were giving me barriers before we got there. But it really was a year-long effort of building relationships to get these 18 physicians on. So someone needs to be doing that and working with them. I think the good thing is once they got in this pilot, it actually is for lower income families. So I really started out with pediatricians in that area, and they were thrilled, and those that that I could recruit, because many of the families, and it's not unusual for any family, but the cultural differences, the language differences, and then even the time to reach out to infant and toddlers, those are some of the things I heard. So if we could get physicians to, in fact, diagnose and say there's a problem, and then to get to interventions, that's really what we want, because there's a gap. There's a huge gap between diagnosis and then intervention. So even if you see 40% are doing this, then we have another gap about getting them into services. So this is what we need to do. The pediatricians is the place we need to be, because they see the families, they're seeing them all the time, and having them in this process and sort of a piece of the system, I think will improve our ability to get to families and children earlier.
And full disclosure, Pat and I were in the same leadership Montgomery class together, 2008.
Yes, we were.
So the proposed plan, and you've got a budget, talks for a budget of about $1.8 million over 5 years, which primarily does 3 things. It adds 2 staff immediately to infants and toddlers. One is an intake person, which my understanding is already in their plan but unfunded, and then a new project manager role. In year 3, because we anticipate a growth of referrals coming in, and the need for diagnosis would be a developmental psychologist starting in year 3. And the other big expense is providing pediatricians. And one of the things Pat didn't say is that they felt 1 year was a little bit of bait and switch, that, we're going to then have to pay for it. We think that's probably not real, because all the research from the organization says that people actually make money doing this, but we thought to, again, lower a barrier, provide 2 years for free of the service. So that really has become ingrained with them. And that's what the budget proposes. So that's our formal presentation. We'd now like to have our guests talk about how it impacts their lives and them. So Loran, do you want to talk for the Early Childhood Coordinating Council?
So good afternoon. My name is Livran Laor, and I'm the chair of the ECCC, but I'm also a mother of 2 boys. One of them just turned 12, and he is the son I would like to talk about. I also would like to bring the perspective of a provider, because I also represent all the early childhood community and their perspective on this issue. So 12 years ago, my first son was born. We were very lucky. We had a wonderful pediatrician. We had a wonderful prenatal care, and we chose a wonderful hospital. And he was born week 36. He weighed only 4 pounds, 7 ounces. So he immediately was diagnosed as a premature baby, and he also had a different diagnosis of failure to thrive because he was so small. So we were released from the hospital with these 2 diagnoses. Even though our pediatrician came to visit us and was able to discharge us from the hospital, nobody on the staff in the hospital told us that if you have such a diagnosis, you should really be in touch with infants and toddlers, because there is a direct correlation for children who are premature and have very low birth weight with other developmental delays. So I had to go to my pediatrician office every other day. Yes, every other day for the first month, because I was determined to breastfeed. And he had to weigh my child every other day to do a blood test. And during the first 3 months of his life, I noticed that he doesn't look to the left side, he only looks to the right. And I told my pediatrician, I'm very concerned about his behavior, that he doesn't really look to both sides. And his reaction was, let's wait and see what happens. Well, I decided not to wait. So despite of my pediatrician, which I really respect and I think is a wonderful doctor, I decided to call infants and toddlers. And to my big surprise, when infant and toddlers came to do the assessment, they told me, oh yeah, that's very common about, among premature babies, that they only look at one side. We just need to make sure he gets OT really early. So I was a stubborn parent, and I had good self-esteem, and I decided to go and call infants and toddlers despite my pediatrician. But I do wonder what happens to a lot of parents who don't feel that they know, and they do listen to their pediatrician, and they don't call infants and toddlers. Now, my son is now 12. He's 5 feet 6 inches. He is thriving very well, and he does look to both sides. So early intervention definitely helped him. And I tell that to anyone who's willing to hear. Now I would like to put my professional hat. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of the District of Columbia and in Montgomery College, and I also serve as the chair of the ECCC. I directed a preschool teacher for 9 years, and I want to tell you about a 28-month-old boy who came to our preschool, and my teacher were immediately very concerned about his development. So we did observations, and we had a lot of notes, and we invited the parents to a meeting. And we told them, we're very concerned about your child's development. Please have him screened and assessed. This is a list of people that may be willing to do that if you want to pay, or you can call infants and toddlers if you are not willing to pay or are not able. I worked in an affluent community. Most of my families prefer to go private. But this family was not happy about what we said. So they told us that they're going to go to their pediatrician and ask his or her advice. Well, unfortunately, their pediatrician told them that they don't need to be concerned. So what did they do? They did not have their child assessed. They pulled the child out of her school and enrolled in a different school that didn't tell them that their child has developmental delays or concerns. Fast forward to kindergarten. The child was going to kindergarten, and he had a really hard time. At the end of the year, they decided to finally go and have a diagnosis. And then they came back to me, that was 4 years later, and said, Liran, we wish we would have heard you, because you are right. We wish we would have started the diagnosis. We wish we would have early intervention, paid or not paid, because now our son needs to go to another year of kindergarten, and he has major delays, and we are not sure if he will ever be able to overcome. So I tell you those stories because parents and professionals find that some pediatricians, without really knowing, really put barriers. And even we as professionals identify that there are concerns. We are not able to give a diagnosis, but we know that something is not right. Pediatricians, without knowing what they're doing, really jeopardize the well-being of children. And that should not be done. I think there is a way to change it. We just need to make sure we are educating families, we're educating pediatricians, and we make sure that if there are concerns, they're being listened and they're being looked at by professionals. So thank you for having me here.
I'm Jane Ford Salzano. You probably know me because I've been coming to the county council longer, probably before some of you were born. And my comment on Montgomery County Services is there's so much push and talk about education, but our children's families are left in the dark. And the burden is greatest on those of minority families and families from other cultures. When my son Brian was born many years ago, there were no treatments available. The only advice I got was he has to go to an institution. He's young. You can keep him for a little while, but he has to go. So fast forward many years, and I'm having grandchildren, and I'm scrutinizing them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 healthy, typical kids. But then came number 7, and I had concerns. And my worst fears were confirmed when he was just 16 months old. His mother had a baby, and I stayed with him for 5 days. And I took him over to Hurley Cross to see her. And instead of looking at the people, he walked around looking at the lights in the ceiling. And then he saw an overhead fan, and he was transfixed, mesmerized by the movement. So we had a nice little visit, and I got up to leave. And little Nicholas got up to follow me. In just 5 short days, he had broken whatever bond he had with his mother. So daughter took him to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician said, there is nothing the matter with that child. He's going to be fine. Your problem is your mother. Don't listen to her. But I felt I knew better, so we went to Children's Hospital, and by the time he was 2, he had his formal diagnosis. I started an in-home intensive early intervention programming using discrete trials. We started at 26 months. He did not know any language. The word apple or book or dog, all the same to him. We could have been speaking Japanese. But we taught him every word for every object, minute by hour, by day, by week. Phrases such as, turn out the light, shut the door, look out the window. And he did learn, and he progressed. So much so that CSAC staff were impressed, and the decision was made to start CSAC's Intensive Early Intervention Program. And in those days, it was funded by CPS. So he continued to thrive. When he was 6, using discrete trials, I taught him to read, I taught him to keyboard. And today he can read and answer questions that he's asked on his iPad in full sentences with correct spelling and punctuation. Now, I want to emphasize, I feel he's a success story. He's not a best outcome kid. His neurological impairment is greater than my son's, and his brain just cannot make his body form sounds and words, so he's still entirely nonverbal. However, he works in CSAC's supported employment program. He puts the bus schedules in the receptacles at the metro stations. Now, there's about 100 bus lines in Montgomery County, each station having 17 or 18 or 19 routes. He knows where he's going and which schedules to pull for those 19 routes. And he counts out 30 of each. And he has a little rolling suitcase, and he puts them in backwards. So what he puts in first is for the station where he's going last. He's very well liked by the staff at Metro. They all know him, they all socialize with him, they shake hands, they smile, and they all call him the mayor of the Red Line. He's very integrated into our Montgomery County community. On weekends, he's always out. He goes bowling, swimming, movies, concerts, and his very favorite is the eat-outs because he can read the menu at the restaurants and indicate what he wants. So you can see why I consider him a success story. I am very, very satisfied because I know he's productive and happy. I cannot say the same for CSAC's early intervention program. We've always operated at a loss, and we've subsidized it because we knew it was our most important program. We can teach older students and adults certain skills. We can inhibit the aggression and the self-injurious behavior. But in contrast, the early intervention program is a game changer. We change the lives of a small child and at the same time of their whole family. We now serve children who have been overlooked by their pediatrician. The parents come in with a 4.5 or 5-year-old. They know there's something terribly wrong. They want a diagnosis and they want treatment. We used to serve referrals of little ones from infants and toddlers. We were severely underfunded, but we did it anyway. About a year ago, they changed the reimbursement system and they doubled the amount. And on that day, they stopped referring anyone from infants and toddlers to CSAC. So one is a success story, but I have concerns about our other programs. I and CSAC enthusiastically support the program to increase Montgomery County's screening, early identification, and treatment of all disabled children. Thank you.
Well, I've only been here 14 months, but that was some of the most compelling testimony I've received since I've been here. That was very powerful. I would like to invite Ms. Barbara Andrews or anybody from the Department of Health and Human Services to come and to the dais as we go through the Q&A. And Ms. Barnes, I'm putting you a little bit on the spot, but if just some initial thoughts or reactions to what you've heard, and I don't know if you've had a chance to see the recommended budget as it's been proposed. If you could just give us some of your initial thoughts regarding this unbelievably important topic, and then as you're getting adjusted, if I could hear a little bit more, I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about the positions that have been recommended or the initiatives that have been recommended but have not yet been funded previously. If we could talk a little bit about that, but let's just start with some general thoughts and then we'll work our way down to that specific question.
Good afternoon. I'm Joanne Barnes, Chief of Children, Youth, and Family Services at Department of Health and Human Services. Really delighted to be here to give support to the presentation and the testimony that you just heard. At Health and Human Services, in our early childhood services, led by Dr. Barbara Andrews, we have been in support of this project, and in fact, we do have staff who are actively involved in the coalition that has been leading and pushing forward this work. We definitely support the concept of early detection, of early intervention, and we want to make sure that appropriate referrals are made to the infant and toddlers program. In fact, in addition to the work we've been doing with the coalition, we have been working on improving our relationship with one of our primary stakeholders, which are physicians, and formulating materials for them to help them with early identification. But that's not the same as a screening tool. We recognize that. This is the first time that I've seen the budget, the proposed budget. I am aware that we had worked with them on the pilot, and which was a much smaller scale, and so that was a different type of proposal. So this is my first time seeing the budget. But we definitely understand the need and the importance for these type of screenings and the impact that it can have on our young children. So,
Dr. Andrews, do you want to say anything?
Well, I basically concur with what Joanne said. Are there things that you specifically want to know about infants and toddlers and how it works? That's something that I can be here. I'm the administrator for Early Childhood Services, Barbara Andrews.
Okay, great. Well, I guess I have a couple of context questions, and I know Councilmember Rice has some questions as well, and Councilmember Glass does too. This is a fluid situation. When we talk about early intervention, you want to do that as quickly as possible. I think in one of the initial slides, it talked about some of those key age groups and those key developmental areas where you want this to take place. But if you could maybe elaborate or articulate what those more specifically are, that would be helpful.
For the MChat, which is a screening tool.
Get a toucher button. Yeah.
For the MChat, which is a screening tool for autism, the two important screening dates are 18 months and 24 months. Pediatricians should be screening at both those times, and there's actually now good screening tools with a very brief follow-up. That's part of these electronic screening tools that really is very accurate even at the 18-month period. So we're getting close to sort of 90% accuracy of the screening tool in terms of getting confirmation when the full evaluation is done that the child actually does have autism. So if you get a positive screening with a very solid electronic screening tool for the MChat, then you can have a lot of confidence that that child will likely be ultimately diagnosed as having autism.
And I guess within the pilot, I really want to commend the pediatricians who are engaged in this pilot and have been active. And it's been my experience when dealing with issues like this, it's those pediatricians that are going to be the strongest champions of this. The families are so passionate and clearly such strong advocates, but when the pediatricians are discussing this amongst their colleagues, I think is when we collectively as a group are going to make an impact. What has their reaction been? What has their feedback been like? And are there any lessons learned there through the initial discussion with the people who are involved now?
So I think what's important is I was reaching out to pediatricians about this whole project. I used other pediatricians who are using this already to reach out to them. So once they did that, I think that was the key because they are in the practice, they saw what happened. So I would say once pediatricians are using it, they're very positive about it, and they were very good about helping me to reach others. So if you're asking, what is that in terms of how are they accepting this? Once they accept this and do it, they're very positive about how that has impacted them in terms of getting families over. I hope I answered that question.
No, that's really helpful. So in other words, their reaction's been positive.
Your reaction is positive. Once you get in the door and get them to say yes,
Right.
Then the reaction is positive. And also, they may just be saying, the new ones, well, I'm going to try it. But then after they try it, what we're finding is the pediatricians like it, stay with it, and find it valuable.
Okay. I've got some more questions, but I want to defer to my colleagues, so I'll go to Councilmember Rice next.
Well, I don't even know if it's a question because I'll end up saying something like, isn't that so? But it really is one. Look, I just spent the last 3 years focusing on early care and education services with the Kerwin Commission. And one of the things that couldn't be more clear is that the development between 0 to 5 is the most instrumental in terms of having that formative brain development. And the reality is that even if the brain isn't functioning exactly the same as your, stereotypical brain would be, there's still that same level of formation that happens during that time frame. And so those are the most important times to intervene. And so it frustrates me because I've heard these stories since my mother was a special education teacher at Model Secondary School for the Deaf some 30-odd years ago, and the same stories are happening. The same stories where people aren't getting the right diagnosis, and then the parents who are resistant to those diagnoses, those both of those things that continue to make it harder for that child to then be successful. And it really is one of those where there's no amount of money that we could spend that isn't worth it. And that's what you said, Pat, when it's like, folks have to understand how much is then needed after the fact, how much money it costs all of us, right? So it's earning potential. When you said about your wife who decided to stay at home, well, she's not earning income anymore. Nobody's factoring those kinds of things in and saying, well, that's income. If she was earning income, that's tax revenue that we get, and now we've lost that. It's not just about the morally right thing to do. There also is a financial imperative, which is why when I talk about Kerwin, I talk about the fact that, yeah, we should do this because we want all our kids to be as successful as they possibly can be. But on top of it, there's also a financial imperative that ties to this well that we're losing right now. I mean, the amount of people, when it comes to mental health issues, all of the parents who have children know what that weighs on you in terms of being a provider and the challenges that you face. Those kinds of things also affect productivity. They affect the fact of you then having to go and have to get additional service. There's so many other ancillary pieces to this. And oh, by the way, the earlier you get your diagnosis, or at least some sort of that there's a question, you can start to draw down on IDEA funds, right? I mean, these are the things that, again, folks aren't talking about and reminding people that are out there that are incredibly important. You know, and so Senator Van Hollen's bill that he has out now that's talking about fully funding Title I and IDEA, a promise that the federal government made decades ago and has never really done, is something that we need to continue to push as we're focusing on this. Because the other piece of it is, and this is kind of the question that I have for you now that I've done this long diatribe about why we should do it, the question is though, do we have the teachers who are properly trained to be able to give them the resources that they need? And I know we have some facilities who are focused on this, but the reality is that I would love to see where we have more teachers who are specifically trained when it comes to dealing with developmental delays for birth to 5. And so if somebody could talk about that and what we're seeing in terms of teacher training and the potential that may be there.
Yeah, and that's clearly an issue in getting, where are these children going to go? Early intervention is a coaching-based model, so it's teaching the family or other caregivers. So certainly us at Easter Seals feels the more inclusion there is, the better. We sort of invented the concept 100 years ago. So yes, there needs to be much more training of preschools to not be scared of kids and to not say, we can't take this child, but what do we need to do to serve this child? And that's what inclusion really is. And yes, better pay for early childhood teachers, better training, all of that is needed. But Montgomery County has a number of places that are doing that, and more so than other locations. So,
if I can add to that, so you're absolutely correct that state dollars come to us when these kids are identified. So, a big step will be they're identified, they're referred, they come to infants and toddlers, then we'll get the state dollars certainly for coaching model type intervention. One aspect of this, though, that may be more challenging, there are a group of kids that I can speak to because of, my own child with autism. Kids with autism, sometimes the coaching model alone is not going to necessarily qualify for evidence-based intervention. All of the evidence-based intervention that the peer-reviewed literature shows is most effective. There's about 6 or 7 different types of interventions. They all have a behavioral and developmental elements to them, and they are all intensive, at least 25 hours a week. Parents can be part of that, and they can be coached to be part of it. But ultimately, providing the correct dosage and providing one of those interventions is what's required to change the trajectory of that child. And, getting the state to give us the money to do those kinds of interventions may be a challenge, and there may be a role for the county to play to make sure those interventions are provided if the state isn't stepping up and meeting its obligations under Chapter C of the IDEA.
Now, there is, with that, the various jurisdictions around here do different things. Fairfax County has a program for children with autism starting at age 2. I think it's full day, maybe half day, but it is not inclusive, but it's an intensive program. The district pays for some of these therapies through Part C in the district and through Medicaid. So for instance, Easter Seals provides ABA in its preschool classrooms and gets reimbursed either by Part C or by Medicaid to do that. So each locality does things differently. Early intervention sometimes pays for autism services, sometimes it doesn't. There's no, is that right, Barbara? There's no real uniformity around that.
I think the best answer to that is that we are funded for a whole range of disabilities. It's IDEA money. It's some state money as well. We do have contracts with providers who can do the intensive services. We also have some of our providers in the infants and toddlers program being trained in some of the intensive services. And Maryland is a coaching approach. But there are funds, and I think it's the way, I'd have to ask Mary who's sitting behind me, but I think it's the way that we write our grant. And so there are funds in there for contracts for a couple of different agencies, CSAC being one of them, for referrals for when children need intensive services. Does that answer your question?
Pat, you were going to.
Yeah, one of the things, we're talking about county and state funds now, but the earlier intervention, there's also healthcare. So a lot of the individuals who come to us can get therapy, speech and occupational therapy. So I think by the earlier intervention, we can say to ourselves, well, geez, we can get some other things that aren't maybe county and state funds, and that also can help that quality of life as well. To your point, there are scarcities of speech pathologists, special educators, and it's a hard job. There's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of things going on, so certainly the Kerwin Commission has looked at that, and I think you have a good point there that we do have to do something on the side to make sure there's enough people to intervene and give those services.
Well, thank you for that. And let me just close by saying this. I think that it will be incredibly important for us to make sure that we're following the bouncing ball as Kerwin goes through the legislature. One of the things that we asked for was additional money specifically to fund the infant and toddlers program. And so that will certainly help. We asked for additional funding to make sure that we're working with our higher education institutions to make sure that we're training our teachers to give them more of that so that they can be mainstreamed and still have that experience. That's a valuable thing for us, and it shouldn't be as though the only way a person receives services is to go to, an Ivy Mount or to go to the Learning Center. It's one of those where folks should have options, just like all of our parents have options for children who may not have differing abilities. The reality is we want those for our children with differing abilities as well. And then what I think is really key for us in this whole discussion involves what we then as a county do when it comes to our commitment. There's no question that certainly for us, we can lay the groundwork, understanding that Kerwin is coming anyway. And so from that perspective, I see this as a down payment. I've seen a lot of what we've been proposing in our system to be a down payment on Kerwin. And some of this starts some of that rolling before the legislation hopefully takes place and is enacted by our General Assembly. One of the last pieces that I did want to just ask about as well is testing. There's been a lot of conversations around the KRA, the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, and obviously we do know that that's still on the later end of the spectrum. But certainly one in which folks have said that this new iteration of what this, and again, by testing, I use that word truly inappropriately because it's really observations that are given by the incoming kindergarten teacher to best assess and understand where folks are. The reality is that we know that folks in our communities of color and folks that are lower income are less likely to even take their children to the pediatrician for these visits. And so they're not even having anyone looking at the child anyway at 9, at 18, and at 24 months. And so we're missing that piece. So from that perspective, I had a thought, Mr. Chair, that we would talk to our minority health initiatives in terms of partnering with them to really create, if we're looking at doing this proposal, to really start to ramp up and making sure that, especially in our communities of color, that they understand the potential of what's out there and the benefits and the challenges associated with not taking advantage and reaping the benefits. Because as we just said, we highlighted all the things, and a lot of people don't know. It's the fear of not knowing and the fear of then what that means, and I won't be able to afford it, and therefore then I'm a bad parent, because if I know that there's something that my child isn't doing and I'm not able to do it for them or get it for them, that's worse than me not just saying anything about it and not acknowledging it. And this is real talk, because I'm telling you right now, I have somebody in my family who is going through this right now. And so it's one in which I think that for us, we've got to really step back and think about all the different ways that we can try and really address this for a lot of the folks who we know are going to need it a lot. And it'll really just change the paradigm. So I just give that as some thought as to some of the potentials that we may be able to look at as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you guys for sharing your personal stories as well. Appreciate that.
Well said. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Picking up on that theme of expressing thanks for everybody sharing their personal stories. Ms. Alzano and I think Ms. Lahore left, but Jane, thank you for everything that you continue to do, and I'll put out an open invitation to the mayor of the Red Line that I will gladly take the Red Line with him and go on that journey alongside him wherever it may lead. So a true invitation to be shared. About 2 weeks ago, I attended the last meeting of the Commission on People with Disabilities and acknowledged the chair of that commission, Dr. Morgan as well, who's here, and had a robust conversation. Didn't really drill into some of the specifics on this because there was a lot to talk about. Another open invitation to return there, as I know my colleagues have and will continue to do on this ongoing conversation. But I was, in the packet, I think it's a report from, or an analysis from the sponsors, and on Circle 11, I just want to read this. The study revealed that of the 231,000 children in Maryland ages 0 to 3, fewer than 20% have been properly screened. The failure to screen leads to disastrous consequences. And we know that to be true. And your personal stories and the stories we continue to hear and the anecdotes that are spoken about by our neighbors, we know that to be true. And this is a really important conversation to be had, and I'm encouraged by some of the results and information that the pilot program has shared. But I appreciate the sentiment that Councilmember Rice talked about the minority health initiatives, because that's exactly the one question I have. In the PowerPoint presentation, there's a slide that is headlined Pilot Project, and in it, the second to last bullet goes through the racial profiles, the demographics of the individuals, the young people who were screened. And that data is not representative of Montgomery County. And so he saw where my question was going without ever having spoken about it. But that's why we all get along here, right? And like each other. We do read each other's minds on more occasions than we would like, probably. But so with the understanding that the pilot project wasn't fully reaching everybody in our beautifully diverse community, talk to me about how the continuation of this would reach everybody.
All right, some of this, the 18 we've added are primarily in lower income neighborhoods, but they were mostly getting started. They're not in this report. Most of it is not in this report. You would see that 6 months from now, you'll see that change. The latest people we talked to were the federally qualified health centers, and they're very excited to get on that. So it's really was targeted towards where are those people, what are the zip codes. Jane did a whole analysis of where are all the pediatric practices. But again, it's going to be, it's why it's 5 years. It's not going to be easy, we think, that you're going to get some people on, and then we're going to have to get them to be advocates for their colleagues.
I would say also that there are features to the electronic tool that may lend itself to working for our diverse community. Specifically, the electronic tool can be read in different languages more easily and then interpreted in English. So it has that capacity as opposed to other screening tools that folks have been using with paper in their offices and just handing out things on paper. Here, with the press of a button, the screening tools can be providing information, both in terms of the screening tool itself, but then guidance to the parents about what to do next. A lot of this is being communicated in their language, which is obviously helpful.
Thank you for that. And so I do want to second the sentiment by Councilmember Rice of utilizing all of our partners internally and externally to help make sure that should this move forward, and I believe it should, that we capture and help all the children in our community, regardless of where they live, regardless of their household income. And thank you for everything that you do, and I'll turn it over.
Thank you both. Brilliant minds think alike. I had the exact same thought with regards to the minority health initiatives, who can be a real asset in this discussion. I just had two final points, and then we have another presentation we're going to get to. In the packet, in the research and analysis that has been done, I just want to highlight something that, apprehension or confusion about what to say to a parent if the child screens positive for a developmental disability may be a barrier. Just the uncomfortableness of not knowing how to communicate. And I think we all have a responsibility to eliminate the stigma that comes with having a child with special needs, particularly in the autism space. All of us now, at this point, either directly or indirectly, have members of our own family or neighbors or friends or classmates in school that are experiencing this. And in fact, our colleague and friend, Councilmember Jawanda, who's been very public about the fact that his daughter has been diagnosed as being on the spectrum. And he has been such a champion always on so many different issues, but is becoming very well versed in this opportunity for us to make an impact. And that's how I would say this. So just sort of a general comment, but something that I know our Department of Health and Human Services and our partners in Montgomery County Public Schools are taking very much to heart, but more work needs to be done there. I do want to point out that the low reimbursement rates for the screenings could be another barrier. Is that at all taken into account in the budget that you've proposed or not?
It is, and on your previous point, one of the things, again, we're not here to sell a particular software program, but it's the one we have experience with. So to make that clear, we have no financial thing with Chattis, but one of the things they've done is they have what they call moment of care decision support. So they have guided interviews for pediatricians to have those conversations based on the test results, and they personalize them. And so it's almost like an AI thing. So they help the doctors have those conversations. Included in the cost of the software are the license for for all the diagnostic tools. So that would be an expense that goes away. It's already included. And again, according to Chattis, they say, and again, they have data, they're not here, but that a typical pediatrician will make $8,000 to $10,000 a year of billing because, again, their system, they know how to bill for it. So it kicks out the right codes and stuff. So that's why they believe they have ultimately a very high retention rate, is because the doctors end up thinking they're going to lose money, thinking they're going to lose time, but the system makes it so efficient and so quick that they end up making money on it.
Right.
So essentially, if you get them to use it, they can build codes out of that.
Okay.
And they can build it not just for early intervention, because it does quite a few things, suicide, things like that. So we did have data from one of the physicians that I was sharing, that they were paying for that and more. And I think that's a key when you go in to talk with them. So if you get them into the system, you will not need to pay for that later. That's the whole idea.
And just two suggestions as we transition to the next group is, one, Nexus Montgomery, our hospitals are very much aligned and are doing really great work. There may be value in continuing this discussion with them as well. And I wonder if the commission may want to invite representatives of Nexus to talk about early intervention as a follow-up to this discussion, and see what from partnership standpoint we can be doing more of with our hospitals, which I think would be valuable. And then finally, obviously I don't want to put the executive branch on the spot, but the county executive has been a tremendous champion in this space. He has personal experience within his own family, and I give him a lot of credit for his leadership in this space on a number of different levels. I know you're just looking at this budget now, Ms. Barnes, but if you could take it back, think about it, process it, and then come back to our committee vis-a-vis Ms. McMillan with your thoughts on this particular budget. Obviously, March 15th is when the county executive has to release his budget to us, but we would very much, I think, appreciate HHS's perspective on this particular proposal and get your thoughts and feedback on it more formally. Thank you all very much. That was incredibly helpful. So we're going to move on to the next panel and our final discussion of the day, which is on transitioning youth pilot proposal. I'm familiar with a little bit of the background on this, and as we transition to the next group, but one of the things I've heard, and I'm sure my colleagues have as well, is the cliff that exists for a number of families who have children with disabilities. There are a number of services available while they are still school age, but when they age out of our school system, there's a precipitous drop in the level of support that not just our community, but across the country, there are services available. And this was easing that transition was one of the principal recommendations of the disability work group, developmental disability work group that was formed by our colleagues in the previous council. So with that, we are going to hear from several representatives today. If folks could introduce themselves, from the dais, and then I believe, Odile, we're going to be turning it over to you. But if everybody could introduce themselves, that'd be helpful.
Good afternoon. Thank you so very much. My name is Odile Brunetto, and I'm Acting Chief for Aging and Disability Services with HHS.
Good afternoon. My name is Kim Mayo. I am the Administrator for Community Support Network in HHS, Aging and Disability Services, and I was actually a member of the subcommittee.
Hi, my name is Rosemary DiPietro, and I am the Program Manager for Montgomery County's Coordination of Community Services Program.
Good afternoon. My name is Simone Guinness. Excuse me, I apologize. Trying to fight off a cold. But I'm Simone Guinness. I'm with Montgomery County Public Schools. I am the supervisor for the Transition Services Unit.
Great. Ms. Brunetto, we're going to turn this over to you, and we got to do something about that acting title. You've been in that position for too long. You've been doing the job for this entire time and doing it pretty darn well. So just throwing that out there.
Thank you
Ms.
so much.
Brunetto.
It's a great honor. I really appreciate that. And as you heard from the previous presenters, this group who has worked on this project also included many families, parents, fantastic advocates and dedicated partners, as well as obviously folks from the school system, the Developmental Disability Administration, and we are really excited to be presenting this today. And as I reflect upon the previous presenters and being struck by the mayor of a red line, this is clearly a wonderful success story for a young man with a disability who is having a wonderful job and being very helpful to the red line passengers. I know we're going to have a purple line pretty soon, so we're going to need another mayor of a purple line. And therefore, we look forward to the young students who are going to graduate from the school system pretty soon and who are going to be able to engage in those kind of activities. So a background about this project, here we go. Takes us back to November 2018, so I'm going to give you a lot of historical information. Again, wonderful advocates and committed residents of our county got together and put together a report for the HHS committee, and I remember some of you were there at that time when Mr. Leventhal was the chair of the committee. And the report included several white papers on important topics to families and persons with disabilities in our county. One of the topics was issue related to the youth who are transitioning out of the school system when they are usually about 21, but sometimes they do transition a little bit earlier. And so we have a formal definition of what is a transitioning youth. And it is really directed by the federal legislation. And here in Maryland, our youth with special education needs are entitled to free public education until they turn 21 years old or sooner if they're able to complete their requirements. And so throughout that period of time, obviously each child has an IEP, individual integration plan, and when the time comes to think about transitioning out of the school system, the IEP needs to have transition activities that are tracked and provided to the young person. So here in Maryland, we are very fortunate that the governor every year puts in his budget funds specifically to target the youth who are transitioning out of the school system. That is not the case in every state of the union, so we are clearly very appreciative and thankful that we have that here. And to put things in perspective, in the transitioning year 18, and transitioning year in the county starts July 1st. So in transition year 18, we had 149 young students who graduated from the schools who were eligible for transitioning services. In the last year, in this year, we have 157 young people who are going to be ready to graduate from the school and are going to be eligible for services through the year. So the eligibility for DDA funds as a young person who graduates is again tied to federal regulations on what is the definition of developmental disability. So I'm not going to read line by line all of that because obviously this is something that has been vested all the time while the young person was in the school system. And so when we are ready to put together a plan for the youth to leave the school system, clearly we need to involve a lot of folks. Clearly the young student, their family members or guardian, staff from the school system, a case manager, which in this network is called a coordinator of community services, a person who links the person and the family with the proper services, the provider agencies, such as folks from CSAC or TLC, the Department of Rehabilitation Services, which funds a portion of different things depending on eligibility, the Developmental Disability Administration, maybe transportation providers. So there is a whole network of folks we need to be involved. So the situation that we have encountered here in the county and also across the state is that for some young people, the process of getting connected with the services has a long delay. And the delay can be as long as 5, 6, 7 months. We also have seen delays, regretfully, that are beyond 12 months. And so families are concerned for sure, providers are concerned, the Developmental Disability Administration is concerned, and they encouraged us to think about a pilot project to try to tackle this issue. So we were clearly very happy that the Deputy Director of the Developmental Disability Administration encouraged Montgomery County to focus on this. And as a result, a group of parents and providers put together a proposal. The proposal was discussed also with the Commission on People with Disabilities, was transferred to the Developmental Disability Administration, and they approved for us to go ahead with that. So the issues we are trying to tackle are multiple. In the county, we have 5 agencies who provide case management services called Coordinator of Community Services. One of the 5 agencies is one of ours. It's a county-operated program, but the other 4 agencies are nonprofit. And there is a lot of turnover in the staffing of those case management agencies, which results in a breakdown on follow-up and breakdown on communications. That is clearly an area of concern. The next one is the fact that those case managers get reimbursed for something that's called billable hours, and training is not a billable service. You can only get reimbursed for a service rendered, but participating in a training or in a meeting, that is not something you can get paid for. We also have seen an increase in the number of students who require transition services, and the public schools have a ratio of 1 to 206 students for these transition services. So obviously that does impact how much can be done. We also have obviously cultural and language barriers. Obviously if information is not well understood by families or students, things don't happen, things don't get done, and so we have to do a better job with that. And then lastly, we have significant young people who linger, as I mentioned, and wait on the wait list, and really things don't happen very quickly at all for them. And so that is something that the Developmental Disability Administration is very interested to change. They would like to see the pilot that we are proposing to be implemented and try to analyze which strategy, which tactics works better. Is it one or is it a combination of things that are going to make a change in Montgomery County? And if we are successful, the state would like to replicate this project in other jurisdictions, because this problem is statewide, it's not just in Montgomery County. So the pilot that has been developed by our wonderful work group here has 4 items to it. The first component is to develop specific webinars for the caseworkers that would include special topics that they need to be very familiar with. And so the thought is to develop 4 different kinds of webinars. And before we would develop the webinars, we will obtain very in-depth information from the young people, their family members, the schools, the caseworkers, in terms of what are the barriers, what did you encounter last year when you were trying to connect with services, what happened, what made it hard, what made it too slow, etc. So once we have that information, we'll be able to develop those webinars for the staff. The second component is to develop a checklist so that families as well as the caseworkers know exactly by when something needs to be done, when do you need to turn a form, when you need to apply for social security income, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously we want this document to be translated in multiple languages. For families, the plan also is to develop webinars for families only, and we will think of doing 2 kind of webinars that again would explain the timeline, how to do this, who can help you if you don't understand something. And then we are also thinking of developing newsletters, electronic newsletter that we can distribute to the case managers possibly 4 times a year and to the family 2 times a year. And again, the material will be translated in multiple languages. And so, again, the good news is that DDA has agreed that this project is very worthwhile, is committed to start funding this current fiscal year and continue in the next fiscal year. And we have this wonderful work group. They meet once a month, and they are working on the details and putting their budget together. So once we have more details, we'll be more than happy to come back and let you know how things are going. I don't know if any of the other presenters here would like to add anything to.
Yeah, I think you did a good job. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm excited that we are moving on this particular recommendation. I think it is so important. So serendipitously, yesterday I was at Ivy Mount for their resource fair, and there were about 51 vendors there, and they were expecting approximately 300 families to circulate through to find out what resources were available. And so it clearly just underscored and demonstrated the need, but how overwhelming it can be. You know, because of everything that is out there at a tough time of transition. I guess do you have a sense of how many families we want to reach through this pilot initiative? How many are we targeting? Do we have a sense of, you know, what benchmark we're trying to hit as we launch this?
Yes, thank you so much. So we usually have about 140, 150 transitioning youth every year. So we would like to go back to the youth that transitioned last year and the year before and ask them and their family members and the providers about the experiences, where were the barriers. And then, of course, we have our group of current folks who are ready to leave our school system sometime in the spring. So we want to look at these 3 cohorts, the past 2 free cohorts in our current group.
Perfect. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, not surprisingly, as we heard with early intervention, disproportionately communities of color that are not in the same advantageous situation may not have the same access. How are we accounting for that in this pilot? How are we taking into account that there may be some families who just don't have the same capacity to be able to address the needs of their children?
So, as I mentioned, we intend to have everything translated in all of the multiple languages for these particular 3 cohorts. Mm-hmm. And the staff on the school system are very much always in touch with the students who did graduate. So, you know, through the partnerships we have and the relationships that the students had with their past teachers or their past transitioning support staff, we aim to reach out to everyone. Is there something else you'd like to add?
MCPS is definitely committed to supporting this project. We definitely have a stronger sense of our current transitioning youth students, the 157 that will be exiting this coming summer in June. We will support in accessing the students who have previously exited, but we would need to rely more on our coordinators of community service to make sure that those families who may be transient, if they have moved, we may not have the most current information. But we are definitely a side-by-side partner here in ensuring that we try to reach all of the families.
And I think one of the issues that's come up also is trying to get information to families earlier, like around age 14, right? Mm-hmm. So
well, we do. That's the current process. We are reaching out to families as early as age 14 because that's when transition starts in the state of Maryland. We also are going back even earlier to our elementary school families and reaching out to them and trying to make sure that they start the process. As you well know, it can be very overwhelming, and they may need to hear it multiple times. Yep. And so we continue to invite them to come every year to annual adult service nights like you experienced yesterday at Ivy Mount, and making sure that they're coming, that they're able to come to the table and that they're prepared and understand the process. However, with the new transformation with DDA, we know that we're now all embarking on a new system, and that's why it's really critical to look at the current transitioning youth for 2020, because they're going to experience things very differently than the 2018, 2019 cohorts.
Okay. Councilmember Rice.
So I'm a little bit curious as I look on WorkSource Montgomery's vision and mission, and their mission is to meet the needs of the underemployed and unemployed, and to develop career pathways that lead to sustainable wage jobs and support a thriving mission. So I'm curious as to whether or not WorkSource Montgomery has worked with you all within the disability community to ensure that folks are reaching attainment of the things that they've highlighted as part of their mission and vision.
I recall that the Commission on Persons with Disabilities has had a focus on increased collaboration with Workforce Montgomery, and there has been discussion with the County Executive's Office in forming a special work group or task force that would include the Department of Rehabilitation Services, Workforce Montgomery, Developmental Disability Administration, advocates for groups supporting persons with different disabilities. So this has been definitely discussed, and we will follow up on that.
Okay, I think it's incredibly important, and we put a lot of money into this entity that's supposed to do this work, and it's not necessarily that you need to reach out to them. They should have actually been reaching out to you, understanding that some of the most underemployed and underserved in our community are our people with differing abilities, especially those that then are either financially unstable and are persons of color, right? So let's just go down the list and check off each of the boxes, and I couldn't see another cohort that represents someone who doesn't need more assistance than them. And so from that perspective, I'm a little bit disappointed about the fact that there hasn't been that reach out from them to you to say, what can we do to help? What can we do to help you along in this? So, while I completely support the pilot, and that's great, I think that there are some other pieces that can help you in terms of on the back end. I will just say that when it comes to with Montgomery County Public Schools, obviously as we embark on, and again, I hate to keep talking about Kerwin, but it is what it is. And it is one of those where, as we're talking about our students who may not have differing abilities to be able to be college and career ready by grade 10, we also need to be, and just as you said, approaching that platform of what is it that we can expect, and trying to have our children achieve certain milestones by certain age specific, a la Kerwin, and what we have expectations there too. And they're going to be different and they're going to be individualized. But the reality is still having some of those benchmarks that are set in place, and because they're not as many, it's not, I understand it'll still be time intensive, but I would like to see us along the lines of our IEP getting to a point where we're saying this is a goal, and we're setting a goal for this young person so that they'll be able to ride the red line and become the mayor of the red line and putting out, leaflets and all of the things. But it's interesting as we're embarking on this new initiative, Montgomery Can Code, and talking about coding. It is one of the things where I know that there are a lot of our children with differing abilities who would do very well with process-oriented work, and especially when it comes to coding, there may be ways in which we can tie them to this field that is ever expanding. And so I really want to see what we can do there. So, Linda, if we can put a note in to reach out to WorkSource Montgomery and ask. See, that's why I love Linda. That's why I love Linda. So I really want to see what that is, but also I'd really like to tap into some of the initiatives that we're working on, to where we know that certainly folks who may not be able to do some of the other mainstream jobs can certainly jump into some of these other fields. Those are the things that need to be identified. You don't need to do all of that work. you shouldn't be doing all of that work. You should be helping to prepare folks, and there are other people who are paid to do this other stuff, and they need to not be forgetting about our people with disabilities, right? They need to be a part of the conversation too. And so, I'm fully supportive. Thank you for all the work that you continue to do, and we'll continue to light the fire under some of the folks who aren't doing what they need to be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you very much. And, I recognize that not everybody has the mind-reading ability that we have displayed here today. It keeps expanding, so be careful for everybody who's here. You soon will have this ability. But for those who don't yet have it, what this comes down to is communication. And it really is a communication plan as I distill it. And I appreciate that, and I think that's really important. But there is one question I just have about it, of the four components. The first one says that there will be webinars, basically, and content created for staff. And as I heard through this conversation, there were 5 agencies that do this work. And so my pretty direct question is, what is the staffing like and what is the turnover like? Because we know that's a problem. And as we get ready for budget season, there are a lot of conversations, and I know a lot of people, particularly the visitors here, there's anxiousness because we remember how last year's budget conversation went. And so when we talk about the staff and wanting the staff to be prepared and help us in this incredibly important work, it's one thing to help train the staff, but if that staff continues its quick turnover, then there's a constant loss, right? So talk to me a little bit about that.
So as I mentioned, we have 5 agencies providing case management services, coordination of services. One of them is our own, and I'll ask Kim to talk about the staff turnover. The other ones are in the private sector, and clearly I don't have their data in front of me. I can definitely get that, but I know the staff turnover in those agencies is really constant. Because they call us, they need guidance, they can't remember the rules of the program, they want us to coach them on how to get the job done. So that is intense staff turnover there. And I'll be glad to connect with them and see if they are willing to share their staff turnover. So for our own agency, Kim is able to provide that.
Yes, so thankfully, we don't have any staff turnover. We have a very stable program, thanks to mostly to Rosemary, our manager. She runs a tight unit, and I think in the midst of all the chaos going on with DDA and the transformation, uncertainty, the workload we're putting on the case managers, it's a very difficult job. And within that, Rosemary has somehow carved a vision and has done a great job of trying to, as much as she can, provide guidance, because that's part of the problem too, is that changes happen and then there's no policy or procedures that go along with that. So I think that's putting additional pressure on the CCS agencies, and then the providers aren't always informed of what's going on, so then there's a disconnect between the CCS and the provider. There's just a lot of varying issues going on contributing to the turnover. I don't know if you have anything to add about what you know from other agencies as well.
I think based on what I know about the other agencies, not necessarily those exclusive to Montgomery County, but those throughout the state, is that the turnover rate in this field is higher than in any other mental health field. So at one point, one of the CCS agencies, I believe, reported that it was at 35%. Or upwards beyond that. I don't know exactly where those organizations stand right now, but it is the problem. It really is the problem. When you say that this is a communication plan, and if you don't have the historical background or the knowledge of the last 4 years of this transformation that is a 7-year transformation that DDA is in the midst of, and you're coming into this field, there's just way too much to know in order to navigate and support a person who's trying to move from the mandated service of the school system to this voluntary system that people are selected to be given services. They're selected by the provider. They select the provider. It's all very much a communication, relationship building process that happens in a short period of time for most of the kids. In that last year of being in school, building the relationships and having a common, knowledgeable person standing in the middle to help you navigate becomes very tough for those organizations that cannot keep a staff longer than 6 months.
I appreciate the candor, and that's why I asked the question, recognizing let's get to the heart of what we're talking about, and the thoughtfulness that has been put into this by everybody is evident. And I'm curious as how we continue to improve that situation, which really is at the heart of it, and the churn. People doing hard work day in and day out that is so necessary. And understanding the strain that puts on them, their families, everybody's families, quite frankly. And so a communication plan and providing best practices and webinars, all of that is great because we want people to know best practices and be up to date on how we continue providing this vital care. But as we have now acknowledged, some of it gets lost in the personnel turnover. And so trying to continue working through how we attract individuals to stay, and congratulations on your own internal metrics. Clearly there might be best practices that we and other providers can learn from that as well. And that might be a conversation for another time. But trying to figure that piece out, I think, would help a lot. And I don't know if the schools, did you have any?
I concur with the high turnover. You know, families often have to restart the process again with the new coordinator that might take on their case. There are times when we have to, and we gladly do, provide the information again. And just to expand on what Rosemary was saying is that it's about that relationship and understanding the services that are available and inherent to Montgomery County, because in some cases, they may not only be serving families in Montgomery County, they may be serving families in other areas as well. Because some of the other agencies, they serve multiple regions within the state.
Understood. Thank you for that. And you know, I'll just close by saying, much like everything else that we deal with here at the council, we know that the status quo needs to be improved upon. We see that for ourselves, and so doing nothing is not an option. And so that is why I'm encouraged by this proposal, but recognizing that it still will require more work to be done. And so wherever those best practices can come from, preferably internally, you know, and learning from each other, I'm encouraged by that. So thank everybody. I want to thank everybody for the work they've put into this and the work that will continue needed to be done.
And could I just say the state legislative discussion that you just had about the bill the council is supporting, part of that is that the rate setting study, which is part of the transformation plan, the timelines for moving everybody into these person-centered plans and making all these changes. This is all what you're hearing, and it leads to this tremendous stress, particularly with the private providers of coordination of case management, because frankly, they don't have the same, benefits and support that a county employee does. And Councilmember Rice was here when we had the discussion about staying in the business of coordination of case management. So the bill is really, the bill that you all just discussed is actually, really important to make sure there's accountability around this. So I just did want to
No,
mention that,
it is absolutely salient to this conversation.
It is,
And, I hadn't used the term reimbursement rate, others had, and we did earlier today, as you rightly noted. So thank you for bringing that back into the conversation.
As we're wrapping up, I want to expand on something that Councilmember Rice said, WorkSource Montgomery, and I have received some feedback from families who've indicated that they wish there had been more workforce development, job skills training programs earlier upstream. And, as we identify jobs that are available to this such critically important segment of our population, that's another discussion, that's another opportunity. And it is an opportunity because there are a number of jobs, particularly now, that we're having a hard time filling. And a lot of these folks have tremendous skill sets, but in very specific keen areas. And it's just identifying those and unleashing them so that they have the promise of a better future. And I think we're discussing WorkSource right now in a variety of ways, but that has to be part of the conversation moving forward as well. And maybe as a follow-up, we can discuss a little bit more specifically MCPS's plan. And I know Dr. Smith is moving, I believe, in a very healthy direction of ensuring more workforce development opportunities and training within our school system generally. And this is an area that we could really do some good work in. So thank you all very much. And I do want to acknowledge Beth Schuman from my office for helping to coordinate our discussion today. And thank you again, Ms. McMillan, for all of your hard work. Thanks a lot.
And I'm sorry, I have one. I just want to thank the actual subcommittee members that came here today.
Oh, thank you all.
It was a group effort.
Wonderful. Well, appreciate you all being here. It's nice to see the fruits of your labor. Thanks a lot.